He was the man behind the darkest crimes of the Nazi regime. But in the final days, he didn't die a hero or even a soldier. He tried to switch sides, tried to save himself. He betrayed everything, even Hitler. This is not a war story. It's the true story of power, evil, and a shocking betrayal the world tried to bury. Heinrich Himmler was born on October 7, 1900, in Munich, Germany. His family was strict and very focused on order. His father, Joseph Himmler, was a teacher who expected a lot from him. His mother, Anna, was a religious woman who also had high standards. From a young age, Himmler was very good in school, especially in subjects like history and Latin. He was quiet and didn't connect much with other kids, preferring to spend time alone studying. Himmler's home life was very controlled. His father didn't show a lot of love, but he wanted Himmler to do well and be successful. This made Himmler very serious about his work, but it also made him feel emotionally distant. He wasn't close to his family, and this feeling of being alone stayed with him throughout his life. As he grew older, he became more focused on his studies, and his parents' strict expectations helped him develop a rigid, narrow way of thinking. These early years shaped the man who would later pursue power in a cold, calculating way. While others played with friends, Himmler spent most of his time reading and thinking about his future. His feelings of not fitting in with others made him turn toward ideas that seemed to promise a better, more structured world. He found comfort in his studies, believing that intellectual achievement was the only way to gain respect. His loneliness and need for approval made him focus on ideas of strict control and order. Himmler's early life taught him that rules and structure were the most important things, and this belief would guide him in his future decisions. Though academically talented, Himmler's emotional life was underdeveloped. He struggled to connect with people who didn't share his serious attitude toward life. This made him more focused on his work than on building relationships. Himmler's home life, where emotional closeness was missing, made him see the world as something that needed to be controlled. His childhood experiences led him to believe that only through strict rules could a person find true purpose. These early experiences of emotional distance and intellectual focus set the stage for the man Himmler would become. He had little connection with others and found himself more drawn to ideas of power and control. The rigid world of his family shaped him into someone who would later pursue the same kind of control for an entire nation. Himmler's early life set the foundation for a man who would later seek power through the strict, cold enforcement of his beliefs. After Germany lost World War I, Himmler felt deeply disappointed. The country was in a bad place, and the Treaty of Versailles made things even worse. This treaty made Germany accept blame for the war and caused a lot of anger and resentment. The economic collapse that followed hurt many families, including Himmler's. He felt that Germany had been treated unfairly and began to believe that the country needed to be stronger and more unified again. Himmler became more interested in politics and national pride. He was angry at how weak the country had become and wanted to see Germany rise again. He started thinking about how things could be different if Germany had strong leaders who were in control. This anger at Germany's defeat made Himmler search for answers in nationalist ideas. Nationalism promised a solution to Germany's problems, and Himmler saw it as the way to bring his country back to its former power. The idea of a strong Germany appealed to Himmler. He believed that if Germany followed strict rules and strong leaders, it could become powerful again. He was frustrated with how weak and divided the country seemed after the war. This frustration turned into a desire to change Germany by focusing on its national pride and strength. Himmler believed that only by following these ideals could Germany survive and thrive in the future. As Himmler's interest in nationalism grew, he began to feel more connected to radical political movements. These groups believed that Germany needed a new direction, away from weakness and toward strength. Himmler was drawn to the idea of a country that would have control, structure, and order, things that he deeply valued. He thought that these movements could bring change, and he wanted to be part of them. His interest in nationalism made him look for answers outside of traditional politics. In this time of anger and confusion, Himmler started to see himself as someone who could help lead Germany to a better future. He believed that Germany's problems could be fixed by strong leaders who knew what was best for the nation. This belief pushed Himmler to look for new ways to make Germany strong again, and it led him to the radical ideologies that would define his future actions. His growing attachment to nationalist ideas was the start of his future in politics. After the war ended, Himmler decided to join the military, hoping to prove himself. He joined a reserve battalion in 1918, but never saw real combat. He wanted to be a soldier, like many others, but he ended up feeling disappointed. His time in the military was uneventful, and he didn't get to experience the action or glory that many soldiers did. Himmler's failure to engage in actual combat made him feel like he didn't belong and left him with a sense of frustration. Even though he was in the military, Himmler couldn't shake the feeling of being left out. He wasn't involved in the fighting, and he began to feel like an outsider. His desire to prove himself only grew, but he didn't know how to do it. This disappointment in his military service made him want more from life. He wanted to find something that would make him important. It also made him more determined to take control of his own future and prove that he could rise above his earlier failures. Himmler's brief time in the military marked the start of his shift from wanting to serve in the traditional sense to wanting to make a real difference in politics. He began to feel like the military had no place for him, and that if he wanted to be important, he would need to look elsewhere. His disappointment with the military pushed him to seek answers in politics. He started to focus more on how he could change the system rather than be part of it. This shift in focus set Himmler on the path toward radical political ideologies. In the years after the war, Himmler turned his attention toward new political ideas and focused on finding ways to contribute to his country's future. This shift from military service to political involvement was key to his rise in the Nazi Party. Himmler's desire for meaning and purpose pushed him to look for new opportunities, and he soon found them in the radical movements of the time. Himmler's time in the military may have been brief, but it left a lasting impact on him. In 1923, Himmler joined the Nazi Party, an organization that was gaining attention for its radical ideas. He had been searching for something that would give him a sense of purpose, and he found it in Adolf Hitler's vision. Himmler was impressed by Hitler's speeches, which promised a powerful and united Germany. Himmler saw this as the answer to the problems he had been struggling with. The Nazi Party's message of nationalism and order made Himmler feel like he had finally found a cause worth fighting for. Hitler's ideas resonated with Himmler, especially the idea of creating a strong, controlled society. Himmler believed that the Nazi vision could fix the problems that Germany faced. He was drawn to the idea of racial purity and the belief that only the right people should lead the country. Himmler quickly became a devoted follower of Hitler, believing that he could help create the strong, organized country that he had always wanted. The Nazi Party's goals matched his desire for order, and he saw Hitler as the leader who could bring those goals to life. Joining the Nazi Party marked a major turning point in Himmler's life. It was no longer enough to just want change. Now, he had found a movement that could bring that change. Himmler quickly rose through the ranks, gaining power and influence within the party. His dedication to the cause, combined with his organizational skills, made him an important figure in the early years of the party. As Himmler became more involved, he realized that he could play a major role in shaping Germany's future. Himmler's rise in the Nazi Party was based on his belief that the party's goals were the key to saving Germany. He was ready to take on a leadership role, using his skills to help Hitler build the regime. His desire for order and control made him a perfect fit for the party's strict structure. Himmler saw this as his chance to prove himself and fulfill the purpose that had eluded him in his early years. He was no longer an outsider. He had found his place in the Nazi movement. Himmler's dedication to the party made him a powerful ally for Hitler. His loyalty to Hitler was unwavering, and as Himmler became more involved, he began to see himself as one of the main figures in the movement. This loyalty and his growing influence within the Nazi Party would eventually lead him to become one of the most feared men in Germany. His decision to join the Nazi Party was the beginning of a path that would change history forever. In 1925, Himmler became involved in the SS Schutzstaffel, a small paramilitary unit that acted as Hitler's bodyguard. At first, the SS was just a small group, but Himmler saw its potential. With his strong organizational skills and ambition, Himmler quickly rose to the top. He saw the SS as the perfect way to bring his vision of a controlled and orderly Germany to life. Under his leadership, the SS grew into a powerful organization, one that would become key to the success of the Nazi regime. Himmler's rise within the SS was rapid. He carefully selected men who shared his beliefs in discipline and order. These men became his loyal followers, and together they expanded the SS into a force that would control much of Germany's security and military operations. Himmler believed that the SS could be the backbone of the Nazi Party, enforcing its ideals and protecting Hitler. His organizational skills allowed him to turn the SS into one of the most feared and respected groups in the country. In 1928, Himmler married Margarete Boden, a woman who shared his conservative views. The marriage was part of his desire to create a respectable image for himself. However, Himmler's emotional detachment from his wife was evident. While Margarete supported him, their relationship lacked the warmth that many marriages have. Himmler's dedication to his political ideals often overshadowed his personal life, making his marriage more about appearances than about emotional connection. Himmler's rise within the SS and his growing power within the Nazi Party marked a new chapter in his life. His marriage, while a step towards social respectability, did not change his focus on achieving power and control. The SS became his true family, and he poured all of his energy into making it stronger. Himmler's role in the SS allowed him to build a base of power that would eventually help him rise to the highest levels of the Nazi regime. This was the beginning of his transformation from a follower to a leader who would shape the future of Germany. The SS grew rapidly under Himmler's leadership. By 1929, it had become a key player in the Nazi Party, and Himmler's influence continued to grow. He had found his place within the party, and his ambition pushed him to take the SS to new heights. This was the foundation of Himmler's future power, a future that would bring with it terrible consequences for millions of people. Himmler took command of the SS in 1929, a small group of bodyguards initially created to protect Adolf Hitler. At the time, the SS was a modest group, made up of just 280 men. Himmler saw potential in the organization, believing that it could grow into a powerful force to control and shape the Nazi regime. He quickly turned the SS into a force that could enforce Nazi policies, focusing on loyalty and strict discipline. Himmler's control over the SS was rooted in his sharp organizational skills and his ability to recruit men who shared his unwavering belief in Nazi ideology. Under Himmler's leadership, the SS evolved into more than just a personal security detail. Himmler focused on building an army of men who were fiercely loyal to Hitler and the Nazi vision. His ability to recruit was key to this transformation, as he handpicked members who aligned with his belief in racial purity and authoritarianism. By 1933, Himmler had not only increased the SS's size, but also solidified its place as a critical part of Nazi Germany's power structure. His rise was a direct result of his success in shaping the SS into a key instrument for enforcing Hitler's laws and ensuring total control. Himmler's leadership style was instrumental in the growth of the SS. He was meticulous and demanding, creating a culture of fear and discipline within the organization. His focus on loyalty above all else made the SS not just a group of soldiers, but an ideology-driven force. This was a major shift from a small group of bodyguards to a national force capable of shaping the future of Germany. Himmler's strict control ensured that the SS was filled with men who were not just loyal to Hitler, but also to the vision of a racially pure Germany. The rapid growth of the SS was a testament to Himmler's drive and ambition. He was not content with the SS just being a protective unit. He saw it as a powerful tool for spreading Nazi ideals. Under Himmler, the SS was tasked with enforcing Nazi laws, controlling the police, and ultimately ensuring that the state's policies were carried out without question. His focus on expansion and control allowed the SS to become a key part of the Nazi machinery, with a role in nearly every aspect of German life. By the time Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, Himmler's SS had become a powerful force. It was no longer just about protecting Hitler, it was about enforcing the laws of the Nazi state. Himmler's growing influence within the party and his control over the SS allowed him to play a key role in shaping Nazi Germany. The SS had become the backbone of the Nazi regime, and Himmler's leadership had transformed it into one of the most feared organizations in the country. Himmler's vision for Nazi Germany was shaped by his obsession with racial purity. He believed that the Aryan race was superior to all others, and that Germany needed to rid itself of any impure groups. This obsession became the guiding principle of the SS, which was tasked with enforcing these racial policies. Himmler saw himself as the guardian of Aryan purity, and he believed that it was his duty to create a society where only those who were racially pure could thrive. Himmler's belief in racial purity was not just about laws or politics. It was a personal conviction that drove nearly all of his actions. He pushed the SS to adopt policies that would eliminate Jews, Romani people, and other minorities from German society. Himmler saw these groups as threats to the purity of the nation, and his belief in their inferiority justified the harshest actions. His focus on racial purity led to the creation of policies that aimed to segregate, discriminate against, and ultimately eradicate these groups from society. Himmler's role in carrying out these policies would lead to the deaths of millions. The concept of racial purity was intertwined with Himmler's personal views on the importance of maintaining order. He believed that only through strict control of the population could Germany become the strong, unified nation he envisioned. This belief in order and control led Himmler to focus not only on racial purity, but also on the need to eliminate any disorder that might threaten the Nazi vision. Himmler's role in enforcing this ideology was essential in shaping the SS into a tool of terror and violence. Himmler's vision of racial purity was influenced by his interest in mysticism and esoteric beliefs. He saw the Aryan race as a divine group with a unique and special destiny. This belief gave Himmler's ideas a religious undertone, making them even more dangerous. He believed that the Aryans were destined to rule the world, and that this mission justified the extermination of anyone who stood in their way. Himmler's mystical views about race added a sense of urgency and importance to his actions, and he saw himself as part of a larger, almost cosmic mission to ensure the survival of the pure Aryan race. The SS's role in carrying out these ideals was central to Himmler's plan. Under his leadership, the SS became the enforcement arm of the regime's racial policies. It was the SS that ran the concentration camps, carried out mass executions, and created the brutal system of terror that would define the Nazi regime. Himmler's obsession with racial purity drove the SS to commit horrific acts, as they believed they were carrying out a divine mission to rid the world of those deemed inferior. As the Nazi Party solidified its power in the 1930s, the SS expanded its role within the German government. Under Himmler's leadership, the SS took control of more and more aspects of daily life. By 1933, Himmler had become the head of the German police, including the Gestapo, which allowed him to target political enemies, Jews, and anyone who threatened Nazi control. The SS was no longer just a security force. It was a force of repression, carrying out the policies of the Nazi regime without question. Himmler's influence grew as the SS took on more responsibilities. It was the SS that established the first concentration camps, where political prisoners were held without trial. These camps became the basis for the Nazi system of terror, where the SS played a key role in suppressing dissent and eliminating opposition. Himmler's role in these actions was crucial. He directed the SS to expand the camp system and turn it into a machine of repression that would later be responsible for millions of deaths. The SS's control over the police and its involvement in the camps gave Himmler an almost unchecked power to shape Nazi society. Himmler's power within the Nazi regime was built on his ability to control the security forces and his ability to execute Hitler's will. By 1939, the SS had become a central part of the Nazi state, influencing everything from law enforcement to the military. Himmler's ability to control these forces made him one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany, and his influence would only continue to grow. The SS was at the center of everything the Nazis did, and Himmler's leadership ensured that the organization remained loyal to Hitler's vision of a racially pure Germany. The expansion of the SS's role in the Nazi regime allowed Himmler to play a key part in the growing persecution of Jews and other minorities. He was directly involved in creating policies that segregated, discriminated against, and ultimately exterminated millions. Himmler's influence over the SS ensured that these policies were carried out with terrifying efficiency. The SS was responsible for organizing the mass deportations, carrying out murders, and overseeing the establishment of concentration and death camps. Himmler's role in this expansion of power made the SS the central force behind the Nazi regime's horrific crimes. By the late 1930s, Himmler's SS had become an unstoppable force within Nazi Germany. The organization had grown to encompass everything from security to military operations. Himmler's control over the SS allowed him to shape the future of the Nazi state, and his ability to enforce Nazi laws made him one of the most feared men in Germany. The SS, under his leadership, had become a force of terror and repression that would define the course of the Second World War. In 1939, as World War II began, Himmler created the Einsatzgruppen, mobile death squads, tasked with following the German army into Eastern Europe. These units were responsible for the mass shooting of Jews, Romani people, and other groups considered undesirable by the Nazi regime. Himmler's control over the Einsatzgruppen ensured that these killings were carried out systematically and efficiently. The Einsatzgruppen were one of the first steps in the Nazi plan to exterminate entire populations, and Himmler's direct involvement made him a key figure in the implementation of the Holocaust. The Einsatzgruppen were given the task of eliminating entire communities, often through mass shootings. Himmler's role in organizing and directing these killings was crucial. The Einsatzgruppen operated with brutal efficiency, killing hundreds of thousands of people in a short period. Himmler's oversight ensured that these death squads worked with military precision as they carried out the orders given to them by the Nazi regime. His involvement in the Einsatzgruppen showed just how deeply he was willing to commit to the Nazi cause, even if it meant the mass murder of innocent people. The Einsatzgruppen's actions were part of a broader strategy to create a racially pure Europe, where those who did not fit the Nazi ideal would be eliminated. Himmler's belief in racial purity drove him to support the Einsatzgruppen, and he made sure they were well organized and effective in carrying out their mission. The mass murders conducted by the Einsatzgruppen were some of the earliest examples of the atrocities that would come to define the Holocaust. Himmler's role in overseeing these actions cemented his place as one of the key architects of genocide. Himmler's involvement in the Einsatzgruppen was part of a larger plan to rid Europe of Jews and other minorities. These mobile death squads followed the German army into occupied territories, systematically killing anyone deemed undesirable. Himmler's role in directing these units showed the depths of his commitment to the Nazi vision. He was willing to take extreme measures to achieve his goals, and the Einsatzgruppen were a key part of his plan. Their actions laid the groundwork for the even more horrific killing operations that would follow in the concentration camps. As the war progressed, Himmler's role in the Einsatzgruppen and their work in Eastern Europe became even more important. He ensured that these death squads were supported by the full force of the SS, the Gestapo, and the German military. The Einsatzgruppen's killings were some of the first steps in the broader Nazi plan to exterminate millions, and Himmler's involvement in organizing and overseeing these deaths was pivotal in the Nazi regime's systematic genocide. In 1941, Himmler's direct involvement in the final solution became a turning point in history. He was not just the planner, he was the executor. Himmler personally oversaw the creation of the concentration and extermination camps, where millions of Jews and other so-called undesirables would meet their deaths. His first order of business was to organize the transport of Jews from ghettos and homes across Europe, sending them to places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor, where they would face unimaginable horrors. Himmler didn't just issue these orders from a desk. He traveled to these camps himself, inspecting the operations and ensuring the killings were carried out with brutal efficiency. His presence at these camps, with his cold detachment, made it clear these deaths were not random. They were systematic, purposeful, and coldly justified in his mind. The murder of millions didn't faze Himmler. His role was to ensure that every part of the process ran smoothly, like a factory that needed to meet its quotas. He wanted to make sure that the mass killings were not only happening in every corner of Europe, but happening quickly and efficiently. The Nazis had already created gas chambers, but Himmler's obsession with perfection led him to push for further refinement. He wanted them to work faster, to kill more efficiently. Himmler's drive for order turned the gas chambers into an assembly line of death, where men, women, and children were murdered in the most cold-hearted manner imaginable. He wasn't just a man following orders, he was making sure that each part of the Holocaust machine worked like clockwork. Himmler's ideological belief that the Jews were a danger to society made him view these murders as justified. He did not see the victims as human beings, but as obstacles to his vision of a pure Aryan Germany. This belief was rooted deep in his mind. He thought of the killings as a form of cleansing, something necessary for the survival of the master race. In his eyes, their deaths were not just an order given by Hitler, they were a moral duty. Himmler's blind commitment to these beliefs is what allowed him to commit such atrocities without any sign of remorse. To Himmler, the Jews and others like them were expendable, and their deaths were a means to an end that he was willing to push toward no matter the cost. In a chilling speech to his SS officers, Himmler told them that the mass murders they were carrying out were essential for the future of Germany. He even called the killings a difficult but necessary task that required strength and determination. Himmler's speeches were meant to motivate the officers, to harden their hearts and convince them that they were carrying out a noble mission, a mission of racial purity. His words were an attempt to convince the men carrying out the murders that they were part of something bigger, something that would benefit their nation. But in reality, Himmler was pushing the SS to become nothing more than a killing machine, no different from the people they were murdering. And it was under his leadership that they did just that. Himmler was deeply involved in the creation and expansion of concentration camps. In 1933, when the Nazis first came to power, Himmler ordered the construction of these camps to imprison political opponents. But as the years passed, these camps became the ultimate tool for exterminating millions of innocent people. Himmler's inspections of the camps were frequent, and his presence at places like Auschwitz became a routine part of his role. When he visited, he wasn't there to mourn the suffering. He wasn't there to ask if the prisoners were being treated humanely. He was there to ensure that the camps were running smoothly, that the death toll was meeting expectations, and that every person who entered the gates never left. Himmler oversaw the development of gas chambers, the mass cremation of bodies, and the use of forced labor. He was the one who authorized the construction of these devices of death. He made sure that they were built quickly and that they were able to kill as many people as possible. It was a factory-like system of death, and Himmler was in charge of making sure that everything was running as efficiently as possible. People were not only killed, they were dehumanized. Their numbers were written on paper, their personal histories erased, as they were processed through the gates of the camps. Himmler also pushed for the expansion of the concentration camps. He wanted them to grow in size and function, turning them into industrialized death machines. Auschwitz alone held over 1 million people by the time the camp was liberated, and Himmler had personally overseen the camp's expansion. He was often seen touring the camp, checking on the work, and making sure that everything was in line with his vision. Himmler was not just a passive leader in this process. He was directly responsible for the creation and operation of these death camps. He was the one who pushed for the construction of more and more camps, spreading the terror across Europe, ensuring that millions of Jews and others were captured and sent to their deaths. When survivors speak of Himmler's visits to these camps, they recall a man who showed no remorse, no humanity. He would inspect the gas chambers, the crematoria, and the barracks, often taking pride in how efficiently the system worked. Himmler's ability to detach himself from the suffering around him was what allowed the Nazis to continue their horrific campaign of genocide. He wasn't disturbed by the scenes of mass death. He saw it as a necessary step for his ideology. His visits to the camps were not to stop the killing, but to make sure it continued without interruption. For Himmler, the concentration camps were not places of horror. They were integral to the cleansing of Europe. The victims of the concentration camps were not just numbers on a page. They were fathers, mothers, and children, real people with families and hopes. Yet, Himmler treated them as nothing more than obstacles to his vision. His role in the camps was essential for keeping the Holocaust going. The death toll rose under his direction, and his involvement made him one of the central figures in the mass murder of 6 million Jews. The horror of the concentration camps was directly linked to Himmler's cold, bureaucratic approach to death. Himmler was more than just a leader giving orders from a distance. He was deeply involved in the execution of millions of people. His personal visits to the death camps, where he inspected the killings, showed just how far he was willing to go to see his vision fulfilled. Himmler made speeches to the SS officers carrying out the killings, urging them to remain loyal to the Nazi cause, and to see their actions as part of a great mission for Germany. He reassured them that the deaths were necessary for the future of the nation. These speeches were not about stopping the killings, but about motivating the officers to continue their work with even more fervor. Himmler's speeches often focused on the importance of loyalty to the Nazi Party and the need to carry out these killings without hesitation. He used his power to ensure that the officers didn't feel guilt or remorse for their actions. He treated the killings like a business operation, ensuring the work was done quickly and efficiently. Himmler's role in overseeing the mass executions showed how he had completely separated himself from the humanity of those being murdered. He saw them as obstacles, as people who had to be eliminated to make way for the future of Germany. This mindset allowed him to justify the deaths and continue pushing forward with the genocide. Himmler also personally ordered many of the killings carried out by the Einsatzgruppen, mobile death squads that followed the German army into Eastern Europe. These units were responsible for shooting thousands of Jews and other minorities in cold blood. Himmler played a key role in organizing these units and ensuring they followed through with the mass executions. He saw the executions as necessary for securing the future of Nazi Germany, and he worked tirelessly to make sure the killings were carried out with maximum efficiency. His leadership in these operations cemented his role as one of the most dangerous figures in history. Himmler's detachment from the horror of the killings made him a key player in the Holocaust. He viewed the executions as just part of the work he needed to do to protect the Aryan race. He believed that these deaths were not just justified, they were necessary for the survival of the German people. Himmler's ability to see mass murder as a routine task allowed him to commit some of the worst atrocities in human history. His lack of empathy for the victims made him one of the most cold-blooded leaders in Nazi Germany. Himmler's involvement in the executions was not just about giving orders. It was about his personal commitment to the Nazi cause. He was determined to see the genocide through, and his cold detachment from the suffering around him allowed the killing machine to continue without interruption. Himmler's personal role in the deaths of millions shows just how far he was willing to go in his pursuit of a pure Germany. His leadership in the executions made him one of the most feared and hated men in history. General Plan Ost was Himmler's plan to transform Eastern Europe into a living space for the German people by eliminating or enslaving the people who lived there. Himmler believed that the Slavic people were inferior to Germans, and he wanted to rid the land of them to make room for Germans to settle. The plan called for the death and displacement of millions of people. Himmler was personally responsible for ensuring that this plan was carried out efficiently. He believed that this was necessary to secure Germany's future and create a racially pure nation. General Plan Ost was not just about killing. It was about reshaping the entire region. Himmler wanted to control every part of Eastern Europe, using the land for German expansion while getting rid of the people who lived there. The plan was one of the most brutal aspects of the Nazi regime, aiming to create a racially pure empire by eliminating anyone deemed undesirable. Himmler's involvement in this plan made him directly responsible for the suffering of millions. The idea of creating living space for Germans came at the cost of the lives of millions of innocent people in Eastern Europe. Himmler's role in General Plan Ost was not just about carrying out executions. It was about organizing and coordinating the entire process of destruction. He oversaw the establishment of death camps, where people from Eastern Europe were sent to be killed or worked to death. Himmler's goal was to make sure that this plan was carried out efficiently. His obsession with order and control made him the perfect person to oversee this genocide. General Plan Ost was one of the most terrifying aspects of the Nazi regime, and Himmler's involvement in it made him one of the central figures in the war's atrocities. Himmler's belief in the superiority of the Aryan race drove him to push for General Plan Ost's success. He saw the death of millions as necessary to create the world he envisioned. The plan's implementation led to the mass murder and displacement of entire communities in Eastern Europe. Himmler's involvement in this plan ensured that the death toll continued to rise, as millions of innocent people were killed or forced into labor. His leadership in General Plan Ost was a critical part of the Holocaust's legacy, leaving behind a devastating trail of destruction. Himmler's role in General Plan Ost cemented his position as one of the most brutal and dangerous figures in history. The millions of people who died as a result of this plan were victims of his twisted vision for the future of Europe. Himmler's commitment to racial purity drove him to push forward with this plan, regardless of the human cost. General Plan Ost is one of the most horrifying examples of Himmler's legacy, and his involvement in its execution shows just how far he was willing to go to achieve his goals. The war was no longer going in Germany's favor. As the Allies made progress on all fronts, Himmler could feel the weight of failure closing in. The Nazi war machine, which he had helped build and support, was falling apart. Himmler, once confident in the invincibility of his ideals, now watched as his efforts crumbled with each passing day. The Allies were pushing into France, the Soviet Union was reclaiming its territory, and the German forces were retreating from the east and west. Himmler's role, once central to the war effort, began to lose its importance. His influence over the military and political direction of the Third Reich was weakening fast. As defeat seemed inevitable, Himmler's priorities began to shift. His focus, once solely on his loyalty to Hitler and the execution of Nazi ideology, slowly turned toward self-preservation. He realized that Hitler's vision was collapsing. The German people, once filled with hope for victory, were beginning to face the truth. The war was lost. Himmler could see that Germany's destruction was unavoidable, and his desperate need to protect himself became his main concern. He had been one of the key figures in carrying out atrocities, and now, with the fall of the regime so close, he feared for his own future. It wasn't long before the man who had helped orchestrate genocide was more concerned with his survival than with continuing to fight for Nazi ideals. Himmler's desperation grew as it became clear that no amount of fighting could save Nazi Germany. He began to distance himself from the failing war effort, quietly searching for ways to ensure his own safety in the post-war world. His desperation became a dangerous obsession, and his actions grew more erratic. He was no longer the cold, calculating figure who had built the SS into an instrument of terror. Instead, he was now a broken man, clinging to power, while the world around him shattered. Himmler's obsession with control had made him one of the most feared men in Germany. But now he was facing the collapse of everything he had worked for. The war had turned against Himmler, and the loss of power was something he couldn't bear. He was used to giving orders and seeing them carried out, but now he found himself scrambling to maintain relevance. He couldn't escape the reality that the very regime he had helped build was on the brink of destruction. Himmler's shift in focus from military power to personal survival marked the beginning of his downfall. He had once been a central figure in the Nazi Party, but now, as defeat loomed, he was isolated and powerless. The war that had consumed him was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it. Himmler's desperation reached its peak in 1945 when he secretly attempted to negotiate peace with the Western Allies. With Germany on the brink of collapse, Himmler realized that the only way to save himself was to cut ties with Hitler. He knew that the Allies were the ones who would shape the post-war world, and he hoped to secure a place in it. In secret, Himmler made contact with the Allies, offering to help them defeat the Nazis and promising that he could still play a role in Germany's future if they spared him. It was a huge gamble, an act of betrayal that would destroy his relationship with Hitler. But for Himmler, it was a risk he had to take. The fact that Himmler tried to strike a deal with the Allies behind Hitler's back shows just how far his loyalty to the Nazi cause had eroded. His desperation drove him to betray the very man he had served for years. Himmler was not only abandoning Hitler's vision, but he was also acting to save his own skin. His actions were nothing short of treason, and when Hitler discovered what Himmler had done, the reaction was explosive. Hitler, furious that his most loyal ally had betrayed him, issued orders to have Himmler arrested immediately. It was the end of an era for Himmler. His desperate attempts to secure his own future had led to his downfall. When Hitler learned of Himmler's secret negotiations with the Allies, he saw it as a direct threat to the Nazi Party. Himmler's betrayal was a personal attack on Hitler's leadership, and in Hitler's eyes, it was unforgivable. The man who had been one of his most trusted allies was now his enemy. Himmler's once unshakable loyalty to Hitler was shattered, and with it, any hope of a place in the post-war world. The Nazi regime had turned on Himmler, and the same terror he had inflicted on others was now closing in on him. His fall from power had begun, and the once feared leader was now a broken man, scrambling to escape the consequences of his actions. In April 1945, as Germany's defeat became undeniable, Himmler's fall from grace reached its peak. Hitler, enraged by Himmler's actions, removed him from all official positions. Once the head of the SS and a trusted confidant of the Führer, Himmler was now a man without power. His influence over the SS and Nazi Germany had vanished overnight. Himmler's removal from power was not just a political blow. It was a psychological one as well. The man who had once been at the heart of the Nazi regime was now isolated, cut off from the system he had helped create. With no official position and no support from the regime, Himmler was left to face the consequences of his betrayal. His psychological breakdown was inevitable. He had built his life around loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause. But now, as Germany collapsed, he had nothing left. Himmler had no friends, no allies, and no power. His world, once filled with control and fear, had crumbled. The man who had orchestrated genocide and terror was now a desperate fugitive, hoping to escape the wrath of the Allies and the consequences of his actions. Himmler's isolation was a direct result of his decisions. His attempt to negotiate with the Allies had destroyed any chance of redemption within the Nazi regime. The SS, the organization that had been his life's work, now saw him as a liability. He was no longer a man of power. He was a man on the run, desperate to escape the consequences of his choices. Himmler's mental state deteriorated as he realized that there was no escape. He had betrayed Hitler, and now there was no one left to protect him. In his desperation, Himmler made one final attempt to flee. With the Allies closing in, he tried to disappear, hoping that he could escape and avoid being held accountable for his crimes. His once unshakable belief in his own superiority was now shattered, and he was left to face the reality of his actions. The man who had been one of the most feared figures in history was now a shadow of his former self, struggling to survive in a world that had turned against him. Himmler's fall from power was complete, and there was nowhere left for him to run. On May 21st, 1945, Himmler's escape came to an end. He was captured by British forces, who had been searching for him since the collapse of the Nazi regime. Himmler had tried to flee under a false identity, but his efforts were futile. The man who had once been a symbol of terror was now a prisoner. His capture was a humiliating moment in a long series of humiliations. Himmler, who had orchestrated the deaths of millions, was now in the hands of the very people he had once sought to defeat. As Himmler was taken into custody, it became clear that he would be held accountable for his crimes. The world that he had helped create was collapsing, and he would no longer be able to avoid justice. Himmler's capture was a fitting end to his career. A man who had built his power on violence and fear, now facing the consequences of his actions. The war was over, and Himmler's fate was sealed. He would stand trial for the atrocities he had committed, but not before facing the bitter reality of his fall from power. The end of Himmler's story came on May 23, 1945. While in British custody, Himmler chose to take his own life. He swallowed a cyanide capsule, ending his life before he could face the trial that awaited him. His suicide was the final act of a man who had once been at the heart of one of the most violent regimes in history. Himmler's death was a cowardly escape from justice. He chose death over facing the people he had wronged. In his final moments, he showed no remorse for the millions of lives he had destroyed. The man who had been responsible for some of the worst atrocities in human history, who had overseen the deaths of millions, chose to die rather than face the consequences. His death did not bring closure to the survivors of the Holocaust. The pain and suffering caused by his actions could never be undone. Himmler's legacy of death would live on, haunting the world long after his own death. The world he left behind was a scarred one, and the memories of those who suffered under his regime would never fade. Himmler's suicide may have spared him the trial he so richly deserved, but it did not erase the horrors he had caused. His actions during the war had left a lasting mark on history, and the survivors of the Holocaust would continue to bear the emotional scars of what he had done. Himmler's death was not the end of his legacy. It was just the final chapter in the story of a man who had been a key player in one of history's greatest tragedies. Heinrich Himmler's actions left scars that went far beyond the death of millions. The survivors of the Holocaust lived with the weight of the atrocities long after the war ended. These individuals, who had seen the worst of humanity, carried the trauma of Himmler's crimes in their hearts and minds. For many survivors, the horrors of the concentration camps never truly ended. The loss of family members, the suffering, the violence, they lived with it every day. Their stories were marked by fear, loss, and a deep emotional scar that shaped their lives forever. Imagine waking up each day with the memories of seeing your loved ones taken away, or watching people around you starve and die in front of your eyes. Survivors of Himmler's terror often had to fight to find hope after being subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Himmler's plans didn't just end when the war was over. his actions lived on through the generations of survivors. Many of them were left without a sense of home, family, or identity. They were displaced, scattered, and forced to rebuild their lives from the ground up. And even when they succeeded, the trauma never really went away. Survivors didn't just lose their families, they lost a piece of their humanity. For the children and grandchildren of survivors, the psychological toll continued. Even those who weren't directly affected by the war still felt the ripple effects of the genocide. Survivors passed on their stories not just as a warning, but as a painful reminder of what humanity was capable of under the influence of people like Himmler. The psychological scars left by Himmler's actions are still present today in the way survivors and their families live, the way they remember, and the way they fight to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. The legacy of Himmler's crimes wasn't just in the bodies that were lost, but in the minds of those who survived. The emotional wounds were deep, and many survivors spent years or even their entire lives seeking peace they could never fully find. The camps, the death marches, the mass killings. They stayed with them, haunting their thoughts. Himmler's role in those horrors left a mark on history that no amount of time could erase. Himmler's legacy is not just one of death, it is a legacy of suffering that continues to affect people across the world. The trauma of the Holocaust isn't just something from the past. It continues to live within the hearts and minds of those who lived through it. And for those who didn't, it is something they must carry forward, remembering that the horrors orchestrated by Himmler and the Nazis are still deeply relevant today. After the war, the world turned its attention to justice. The Nuremberg trials were meant to hold the highest Nazi leaders accountable for their crimes. Himmler, however, was not there. He had committed suicide before he could face trial, avoiding the very justice that so many of his victims had been denied. Himmler's absence from the trials left a hole in the prosecution's case. The world never got the chance to hear him stand in the dock, answer for the millions of deaths he had ordered, and face the survivors he had helped destroy. The Nuremberg trials, however, still had a massive impact on how war criminals were viewed and punished. Although Himmler was missing, many of his colleagues were tried, convicted, and punished for their role in the Nazi regime's crimes. The SS, the organization Himmler had built, was deemed a criminal enterprise. This decision was a direct blow to Himmler's legacy. The people he had led, the terror he had created, were now being brought to justice in front of the world. Himmler's absence from the trials meant that he never had to answer for his actions. The survivors of the camps never got the satisfaction of hearing him confess, apologize, or justify his role in the horrors. In a way, his escape from justice was just another act of cowardice. Himmler's death, while ending his personal involvement, did not stop the weight of his crimes from continuing to haunt the world. His legacy, built on murder and terror, was one that would never be fully answered for in a court of law. For the victims and their families, the Nuremberg trials were a form of justice, but they were incomplete. Himmler's absence left an emotional void. They couldn't look into his eyes and hear him acknowledge what he had done. The trials were important, but they were also a reminder that not all of the criminals would face the consequences of their actions. Himmler's escape, though tragic for those seeking closure, did little to soften the pain of those who had lost everything to his regime. The legacy of Himmler, despite his death, lived on through the decisions of the Nuremberg trials. The trials helped the world see just how deep the evil had run under Himmler's leadership. It wasn't just about his absence, it was about the long-lasting effects of his actions and how they shaped the future of international law and justice. The world would forever remember Himmler, not just for his crimes, but for the fact that he never had to face justice for them in person. Revisiting Himmler's ideological beliefs. Himmler's beliefs were grounded in a twisted view of racial purity and power. He believed that the German people were the master race, destined to rule the world, and that others, particularly Jews, posed a threat to the future of Germany. Himmler saw the world through this lens of superiority and inferiority, justifying unimaginable horrors as a necessary step in creating a better world. His commitment to these beliefs fueled the policies that led to the deaths of millions, and his ability to rationalize these crimes as part of a greater good made him one of the most dangerous figures in history. Himmler was obsessed with the idea of creating a racially pure state, a society where only the Aryan race could thrive. He believed that the purity of this race needed to be maintained at all costs, and that those deemed inferior must be eliminated. This belief in racial purity was central to his identity. He didn't see his actions as evil, he saw them as a mission to save Germany, and by extension, the world. His personal commitment to this idea led him to create the death camps, organize mass shootings, and carry out some of the largest genocides in human history. The Nazi ideology of racial superiority was not just a political agenda to Himmler, it was his personal worldview. He dedicated his life to enforcing these beliefs, and everything he did was in pursuit of this goal. Himmler's belief that the Aryan race had a divine right to dominate the world drove every decision he made. His connection to Nazi ideology wasn't just intellectual, it was personal, emotional, and obsessive. He didn't see people, he saw threats, obstacles, and problems to be solved through violence and control. The impact of Himmler's beliefs on the Nazi regime was profound. He was the architect of the final solution, and his role in shaping the policies of the Third Reich made him one of its most dangerous figures. His beliefs, while rooted in his obsession with power, were shared by others in the regime. Himmler didn't act alone. He was part of a larger machine built on racist ideology, and it was this machine that led to the deaths of millions. His commitment to the Nazi cause was unwavering, and this made him a key figure in one of the darkest periods of human history. Looking back at Himmler's beliefs, it's clear that they were driven by fear and hatred of anyone who didn't fit into his narrow view of the world. He didn't just want to control Germany, he wanted to reshape the world based on his own twisted vision of racial purity. His influence extended far beyond the battlefield and the camps. It seeped into the very fabric of Nazi society. Himmler's vision for a perfect world was built on bloodshed, and his personal commitment to this vision made him a symbol of evil for generations to come. The crimes committed under Himmler's leadership had a lasting impact on the world. The Holocaust, orchestrated by Himmler and carried out by the SS, forever changed the course of history. The scale of the genocide, 6 million Jews, millions of Romani people, disabled individuals, and other undesirables, left an indelible mark on the world. Himmler's actions influenced not only post-war Europe, but the entire global community. The lessons learned from the atrocities committed under his watch shaped international law, led to the creation of the United Nations, and changed the way the world would view human rights forever. After the war, the international community came together to create institutions that would prevent future genocides. The horrors of the Holocaust could not be ignored. Himmler's actions were a wake-up call for the world, and the need for laws to protect human rights became more urgent than ever. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, was a direct response to the crimes that had been committed during World War II. Himmler's legacy, although filled with death and destruction, led to the creation of international institutions meant to prevent such horrors from happening again. The world would never be the same after Himmler's actions. The lessons of the Holocaust are still relevant today, as genocide and hate continue to be issues in many parts of the world. Himmler's death reminds us of the dangers of unchecked power, propaganda, and racist ideology. It is a reminder that such ideologies, when allowed to flourish, can lead to the most extreme forms of violence and destruction. The world must never forget Himmler's actions if we are to ensure that they are never repeated. The creation of international laws and institutions after World War II was an attempt to ensure that the world would never again fall prey to the kind of hatred and violence that Himmler's legacy represents. But the fight is ongoing. The lessons learned from the Holocaust, about the dangers of unchecked power, propaganda, and racial superiority are as relevant today as they were then. Himmler's story should serve as a warning to all of us that we must always stand against injustice and never forget the horrors that can come from blind loyalty to dangerous ideologies. As we remember Himmler and the pain he caused, we must commit to creating a future where humanity's greatest lesson is one of compassion, justice, and respect for all people.